Mayong gabi kanatong tanan. Good evening. Welcome to this learning event series brought to you by the Dumaguete City Host Lions Club and the Rotary Club of Dumaguete South. This learning event will be very happy to answer your questions, but you need to please type your questions in the question and answer box or on FB Live. Tonight, our resource person is Dr. Ronald U. Mendoza, a governance and institutional reform specialist with over 25 years experience in development policy and public administration reforms. Presently, he is Dean and Professor of Economics at the Ateneo School of Government. From 2011 to 2015, he was an Associate Professor of Economics at the Asian Institute of Management and the Executive Director of the AIM Rizalino S. Navarro Policy Center for Competitiveness. Prior to that, he was Senior Economist with the United Nations in New York. His research background includes work with UNICEF, UNDP, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, the Economist Intelligence Unit, and several Manila-based non-government organizations. He is presently a member of the Armed Forces of the Philippines Multi-Sector Governance Council. Also, with the Philippine National Police Special Action Force Advisory Council, the AFP Health Service Command, Multi-Sector Advisory Board, the Ateneo University Press Editorial Board, and the Community of Interest Panel of the Towards Sustainable Mining Initiative of the Chamber of Mines of the Philippines. Dr. Mendoza is Chief of Party of Participate, a 3-year US aid project focused on strengthening citizens' participation in democratic processes. Early this year, the United Nations Economic and Social Council approved Dr. Mendoza's appointment to serve with the 24-person UN Committee of Experts on Public Administration. Finally, Dr. Mendoza is a reserve officer with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel with the Philippine Air Force Reserve Command, and he is also an adopted member of the Philippine National Police Academy Bagsay Lahi class of 2006. We are all very happy to have with us to share his thoughts, Dr. Ronald U. Mendoza.
Maraming salamat po. You may now play my presentation. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share some insights on the blue economy. It's a concept of sustainable development applied to the maritime economy, and this is an area of work I've been doing since my time in Asian Institute of Management and now also in Ateneo. It's a pleasure for me to speak to you today about this particular topic. Let me begin with this image, which is probably quite ubiquitous in the Philippine fisheries sector. It's a 95-kilo yellowfin tuna somewhere in Palawan, and you will see the workers actually hauling in this catch. Such a tuna, I'm told, can fetch anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 in foreign market. And of course, here in the Philippines, it fetches a lot less than this. But you can imagine that the workers actually engaged in this area are not very well paid. And the area itself may not necessarily be um, you know, utilizing extensive technology and extensive value-adding processes and technologies, so that it's very much harvesting and direct exportation of some of these products with very little value added. Now, this image is an image in Singapore. This is actually a vertical farmer who is raising crabs and fattening crabs. And this sells at about 30 to 35 kilos, at least during the time when we collected this information. And it sells in the wholesale market at around $40 to $48 a kilo. So certainly quite lucrative, high technology, utilizing a lot of research in order to enhance productivity. And it is the kind of investment in the maritime sector that we in the Philippines have not yet been able to deploy. And you can see the vast difference between this entrepreneur and the Filipino in the previous image. A big difference in terms of productivity and therefore also in terms of incomes. So the reality for us in the Philippine fisheries and maritime sector is that this sector is characterized by high poverty. These are figures from 2018, and the fisher folk actually are second only to farmers in terms of poverty incidence. So in 2015, the poverty incidence in this area was about 37%, but in 2018, it became about 27%. And we expect that the pandemic is not likely to have improved this, may even have exacerbated poverty in this area, despite the clear importance of the fisheries sector in terms of our food security. So here is the formal definition of what I'm talking about. And those figures in the previous slides gave you a sense of the overall challenge we're facing in terms of the blue economy. So the blue economy, put simply, is a version of the green economy made relevant to seas and oceans. So everyone is more or less familiar with the green economy concept, which is the sustainable development of the economy, mostly having to deal with the terrestrial sector. The development of the blue economy is fairly recent, and it followed the discussions in terms of the possible importance of the maritime economy. And it emphasizes the sustainable management of marine resources. And because of the advancements in technology in this area, there appears to be more and more economic promise in terms of the blue economy. Now, of course, you might say that I'm a little slightly biased in terms of the color blue, but I guess this is a tongue-in-cheek sort of presentation or framing of how important the blue economy is vis-a-vis the green economy. So nothing wrong with green economy. It's something we should pursue as well. But the blue economy is especially important, at least I would say, for a country like the Philippines for various reasons. First, the marine economy or the marine zones account for about 86% of the Philippines' total territory. And this is just the sovereign zones where we have control. And the Philippines is the second largest archipelagic country in the world. We are second only to Indonesia. We have the fifth longest coastline in the world, and we control, or within our territory, we have 70% of the Coral Triangle, which is the richest area in terms of marine biodiversity declared by scientists. And finally, the world's 10th largest fishing catch, that's the Philippines, the fourth largest shipbuilding industry, thanks to foreign investments in this area, and the leading provider of global maritime manpower. So many OFWs that are actually working in the marine sector, in ships, in cruise lines, and also in cargo ships, and of course in ports. This is a very, very large, or it accounts for a large segment of our overseas Filipino workers. So part of our work has been to value the marine ecosystems, and with valuation comes an appreciation of how important they are to our economy and also to our national security. So in collaboration with scientists from the UP Marine Science Institute, and I'm mentioning here Dr. Rod Asansa, who's been a longtime partner More recently, we have been working with Sec Ernie Pernia as well. We've been working with the Department of Foreign Affairs since actually around uh, roughly about 2013 to develop this concept and to try and apply it to us here in the Philippines. And we've come up with this figure. This is a study we did in collaboration with DFA, that the conservative monetary value that the marine ecosystems in our territory can contribute to the Philippine economy in PPP US dollars in 2007 prices is roughly in the neighborhood of $970 billion to $1.5 trillion dollars. So this is a publication that we came out with Dr. Roda Sansa in 2017. This gives us a sense of how important the marine economy is to our overall economy, even though we know that this is an underinvestment invested area, and certainly a sector that has not yet been the main focus of our development efforts. So the Philippine blue economy, what are the promises in this area? Well, according to the emerging science from other countries, and also developed by some of our scientists, vertical ocean farming, which can produce a lot of food for our people as we emerge in our development, and we have a growing middle class with a growing um, demand for higher value food. The vertical ocean farming in the maritime sector can also play a key role in satisfying this demand, and also the demand from other fast growing countries with growing middle class, like China and also large parts of ASEAN. The ocean-based renewable energy is also an area where scientific developments have been increasing lately. And there has been a lot of technology harnessing tidal wave power, marine biofuels for sustainable and reliable energy that has been piloted and applied in other countries and may potentially be a source of investments and scientific breakthrough when applied here to our country, to the Philippines. And then finally, marine biotechnology, marine biodiversity products for health, cosmetic, environmental, and nutritional purposes, given the sheer size of our marine sector. So all of these potential, we hope to explore in a very sustainable way, such that it does not destroy the potential for the maritime sector to contribute, to sustainably contribute to our development for the longer haul. So that's the key here, is to be able to develop this sector without actually destroying the systems that underpin its sustainability. Now, in terms of the industrial development in the blue economy, which also relates to our national security, this is extremely important. This is a poster that I saw if I recall correctly, in Canberra when I visited Australia. And I saw this in their airport, True Blue. So essentially, they have an appreciation of their blue economy as well. And of course, Austal is one of their big shipbuilding companies in Australia, an investor that is likely to also look at the Philippines as a destination for some of its investments, if not already. If I recall correctly, they were looking at Subic as a potential investment destination. And here, I just want to point out that the slogan actually could be something that we ourselves could learn from. It says here, designed for Australia and built by Australians. And certainly, this is the kind of shipbuilding industry that we also may be interested to develop in the Philippines. And we certainly have a semblance, or at least some emerging capabilities in the shipbuilding industry, thanks to sufficiently large foreign investments in this area in the past 2 or 3 decades. And these are some of the ships that we have already made in the Philippines, or at least assembled in the Philippines. But the challenge, of course, is that in terms of the value added, we are still stuck mainly with assembly and manufacturing of these ships. Most of the materials are actually imported since we don't have a steel industry to speak of. And our challenge is to develop the upstream and downstream capabilities, which are higher value added and higher paying in terms of the higher quality jobs that they are creating. So for upstream, design and development and R&D, these are areas that we should really be thinking of investing in and developing. And then for downstream, there's marketing and brand management to develop our own Philippine brand in this area. And then also sales and service to the extent that this also allows for greater growth in export markets. If you want an analogous story, that is potentially the automobile industry. So these are some of the directions that we hope our shipbuilding industry will also take, but they are requiring a lot of investments, but also good governance in order to get us moving in these directions and increase value added in this sector. So until we do that, the Philippine maritime sector is actually playing a very small role and actually has a very small footprint in our formal GDP. In our informal GDP, it could actually be playing a much bigger role since we all know that the GDP does not fully take into consideration all the value and all the information, particularly the public goods benefits from certain sectors, notably the maritime sector. But it shows here that in terms of total employed labor force, the total employed as a share of the maritime sector, or the maritime sector as a share of total employed, is very, very small at 4.3%. And in terms of the total output is also quite small at 1.3%. And yet there's a lot of promise, and I'll just round off the presentation here by talking about some of it. Benham Rice, or formerly Benham Rice, now called Philippine Rice, is a 13 million hectare underwater plateau located near Aurora, the province of Aurora. And it is larger than Luzon and potentially contains a rich source of natural gas and heavy metals. So this is certainly an area that could prove quite promising in terms of contributing to our economy if sustainably developed and if we are able to attract enough foreign investments with the right type of technology that they can bring to the Philippines. As I mentioned already earlier, in terms of energy sources, the ocean can provide a lot of sustainable energy and renewable energy. So ocean energy thermal conversion is one of those areas that scientists are now developing and even piloting in different parts of the country. And a study by Mindanao State University researchers showed that the Philippine ocean resources around 1,000 square kilometer area could generate about 170,000 megawatts of power. So just for comparison, this is 10 times the peak demand in 2019 prior to the pandemic. So this is indeed quite promising if these are the types of technologies that can be broadly applied and commercialized and used in favor of our economic development and continued sustainable development as a country. So these are some of the projects that are now being developed. 7 projects as far as DOE, and this was actually a dated figure. This was reported in 2017. I can imagine that some of the projects may be delayed because of the pandemic, but certainly the promise of these types of projects remain as a source of renewable energy. In terms of tidal in-stream energy conversion, TSEC, this is another way of basically transforming that energy from the ocean into energy that we can use for our development and industrialization. There are several firms that are already investing in the Philippines. And here is just further information for those interested in terms of pioneering tidal stream energy, which presumably are still in play, though I wouldn't be surprised if they're somewhat delayed because of the pandemic right now. But these are all, just to emphasize that these are all very promising sources of renewable energy for our people and for our economy. Now, since I've been talking about the promise of the blue economy for the Philippines, I also want to emphasize the different policies that other countries have been putting in place in order to develop more extensively this sector in their economies. And we can learn a lot from how other countries have actually moved ahead in terms of emphasizing the blue economy in their respective development plans. For Singapore, they have initiatives to boost the maritime industry and have created technology funds to keep investments pouring into research and development into this sector. They have also implemented simplified procedures so as to lower the cost of transacting and investing in this area. And they have also implemented the Maritime Sector Incentive Scheme, which allows for streamlined tax incentives for shipping companies and other investors in this area. And so Singapore is one of those countries that is making a play to become a shipping hub in the region. And of course, it is already a transport hub in terms of air transport. And you know, of course, how many, the prominent role played by Singapore Airlines, for instance, in terms of travel in ASEAN. But Singapore is also thinking of becoming a major shipping hub, and hence is pursuing many of these reforms to make it easier for investors to look at it as a potential shipping hub. Now, the Vietnam is another country, and it has a sea strategy, which is called Sea Strategy up to 2020, where it aims for the maritime sector to contribute anywhere from 20 to 56% of its GDP by 2014. By 2020. And it is also in the process of developing up to 15 coastal economic parks, with the maritime industry as the leading economic sector, followed by oil and gas, seafood, and tourism industry. So it has a game plan to try and elevate the importance of the maritime sector in its continued industrialization and development. And it also wishes to see this develop in a very inclusive way so that it continues to reduce poverty and increase the standard of living of coastal residents. Its target is to increase their standard of living by 2.5 times. So that is also an area that we need to focus in, not just to funnel investments and technology into sectors and private incentives into sectors, but also to make sure that impetus for development is very inclusive, such that many of those workers that I just showed you the image in the beginning of this presentation would also benefit from this kind of development. It will be job generating. It will generate good, better paying jobs, which will hopefully create the middle class that also appreciates better the importance of the blue economy in our future. So this is the good dynamic that of development that we would really like to see, where the development of the blue economy reduces poverty, creates a middle class, and a middle class that appreciates the importance of protecting the sustainable use of the maritime sector or the blue economy itself. Now, Indonesia is another country, and of course, it is the most archipelagic country in the world. It is the first in the ranking, and we are the second. And it created a vision of development called the Global Maritime Fulcrum, where it sees the blue economy playing a key role, not just in their economy, but also in terms of their national security, given the importance of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean and how Indonesia sort of straddles this area. And it has also created, as I mentioned, the Global Maritime Fulcrum Vision, which envisions a coherent strategy and set of policies around the development of this sector so that it will become a major player in the blue economy, at least, according to its vision globally. Now, before I end with the government policies, I also wanted to emphasize that some of it is actually cooperative in nature. So international cooperation is a key ingredient in the blue economy. Why? Because there are key aspects of the blue economy that requires cooperation across countries. It cannot just be managed by one country alone, because the ecosystems that underpin the blue economy, the marine ecosystems, actually are almost borderless. They transcend different national borders and therefore require the cooperation of these nations in their protection and in their sustainable development. So here I just wanted to mention that the Philippines plays a key role in this because 70% of the Coral Triangle is in areas where Philippines has control, and it is considered the center of marine biodiversity in the world, surpassing even the Great Barrier Reef of Australia. So globally, we are quite distinct as a country in terms of our sheer influence on the most biodiverse, marine biodiverse area in the entire planet. And this is the Coral Triangle, where 70% of that area is actually in Philippine territory. And just to emphasize the importance of that, as most of you will probably know by now, spawning grounds for much of the food resources, such as bluefin tuna, are actually in different parts of the region, the Asian region, and are in different parts of our country. But when they are in our country and being protected in our country, they are nevertheless harvested partly outside of our country and benefiting other countries in terms of that harvesting. So it really requires a systems-based approach, systems-based lens to appreciate that a country protecting food resources may actually be benefiting many other countries and therefore creating the possible incentives for cooperation and support for that protection, and also underpinning the science and evidence base behind managing sustainably the harvesting of these resources so that they can continue to spawn, continue to be part of that sustainable ecosystem. Once you destroy that or parts of those ecosystems or disturb them, you may actually be impacting on the food security, not just of that country, but of other countries as well in the region. So these are important points that we need to consider, particularly when we're thinking of development projects in this area of the blue economy. So as far as threats and vulnerability, I just wanted to emphasize a few, and I don't want to belabor this point. The degradation of coastal ecosystems. So Philippines has endangered reefs, and one of the most one of the countries with the most amount of reefs endangered, with 98% of reefs at risk from human activities, according to World Resources Institute. And this was reported in 2012. Obviously, this needs some updating, and it could actually be just as large as this today or even slightly larger. The case is still the same in 2011 when the WRI reported again the Philippine coastal reefs are included in the most endangered. And the numbers of endangered marine and coastal species are also rising over time, with 625 threatened fish species in 2010. And again, if you think about this from a systems-based perspective, if these resources are not able to replenish themselves, then we could actually have real negative food security implications if they are endangered into extinction. And part of the challenge, of course, again, Philippine artisanal fishermen are already being affected by illegal fishing, even within our municipal waters. So the unsustainable harvesting of some of these fish resources are threatening the ability of the system to replenish itself, which then threatens the long-term survivability of the ecosystem itself, and threatens our food security also in that longer term. So the PSA has been reporting that the catch of our artisanal vessels, these are the smaller, less technologically equipped vessels, have been on a steady downward trend in the last 10 years, peaking in 2010 at 2.4 million metric tons and reaching a low of 1.9 million metric tons in 2020. So this is a really bad sign, and also shows the stress in terms of the productivity of the artisanal fishing sector. So even with the same effort, they are actually catching less. And this is a sector that we know already has a lot of poverty. So this kind of decline in productivity is also threatening those poor families even more. A recent report of DA-BIFAR and the USAID Fish Rights estimates that municipalities lose anywhere from 275,000 to 402,000 metric tons per year to illegal fishing. So this is a sheer large amount of loss for many of the fisher folk that can actually probably explain why they are remaining poor and why they are stuck in poverty, because a lot of the resources are actually taken from them, and they are becoming less productive because of this unsustainable harvesting of those resources. Then there's also bad governance, and I don't want to belabor the point here that there are many examples of um, bad governance in the maritime sector across the country. I'm sure you're familiar with black sand mining and the governance issues attached there to the north of the country. Then there are leaders who do not understand or do not try to understand the science of these marine systems and the sustainability necessary for keeping them protected by ordering the killing of certain types of species, whales and sharks, thinking that would actually result in more catch for the fisher folk, when in fact it will disturb the ecosystem and may in fact destroy it because of this kind of behavior. And then also the unsustainable development of tourism in some parts of the country, which also threatens that very industry itself and threatens to turn away tourists eventually because of the unsustainable development and unsustainable aspects of that industry. So these are all aspects of bad governance which we must overcome in order to continue to develop this sector, but in ways that are much more sustainable. There is also, I just briefly mentioned this, the threat of sea level rise, which primarily affects our coastal regions. And our coastal regions are where our fishermen and fisher folk are. And obviously, the fisher folk are actually among the poorest in the country already. So this kind of risk faced by many of our fellow Filipinos in the coastal region it's like a double whammy in terms of their declining productivity and at the same time increasing risk in terms of climate change. So thinking again in terms of systems, our shift to more sustainable and more renewable energy sources allows us to mitigate or at least contribute to the mitigation of climate change. And at the same time, also, we need to invest in ways to mitigate the harm and the risk that many of our fisher folk face, particularly as their main means of living are affected by over harvesting and also because of the immediate impacts of climate change. And then finally, there's also the issue of national security, as I've been mentioning several times already in the beginning, that there is much at stake in terms of some of the disputes our country is now involved in. China is claiming 85.7% of the waters of the South China Sea, where over one half of the world's seaborne trade passes, with a value of about 5.3 trillion annually. So there is a lot of stake in terms of that maritime real estate that we're talking about. And there's also a lot of resources at stake for us, the Philippines. So Malampaya's reserve, which is due to run out this year without an alternative, as noted by some of our national security experts, and this increases the importance of the other contested areas in the West Philippine Sea. Reed Bank alone could hold up to, according to some estimates, 135 times the oil and up to 16 times the amount of natural gas deposits of Malampaya. And this, of course, increases even more the stake in terms of what types of resources could be achieved by our country if we were able to assert our rights in these areas much, much more successfully. And then also linked to national security, because we have very porous borders and in some places very bad governance of our borders. Then obviously the threat of terrorism and these other border incursions are part of what we need to deal with, and especially in the southern part of the country where this is an acute risk. And so international cooperation is as I noted, necessary in terms of addressing some of these emerging risks. One example is the Sulusi Initiative, which sees the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia agreeing to undertake trilateral patrols in the Sulawesi Seas to combat terrorism, piracy, kidnapping, and other crimes in the area. Now, I will begin to wrap up the presentation with a suggestion that may be considered by your group and also by different provinces in the Philippines in terms of better marine spatial planning as a tool for better governance of the blue economy. And What is marine spatial planning? It's a practical way to organize the use of the ocean space, organize around human uses and between uses and the marine environment, the system that you need to protect. It is an integrated framework for management, and it has been developed and applied in other countries. There are actually applications in the country already, but not yet widespread. And it is a continuous and interactive process that should be regularly funded and adapted with a planning cycle that is recurrent and that requires engagement of multiple actors and stakeholders at various governmental and societal levels. So it allows for an inclusivity in the decision making and a transparency in the decision making that is supposed to also make the decisions much more credible, much more accepted by the public, and hopefully better governed by the number of stakeholders involved in terms of those who are affected, but also those who are going to benefit from investments in the blue economy. So there are three areas that can be included in such marine spatial planning. Obviously, environmental is one of them, and I won't belabor that point. But the social area can actually be figured in to the extent that many stakeholders can be affected by investments and developments, either as beneficiaries or affected communities in the blue economy. It can improve opportunities for public and stakeholder engagement in ocean use management, which may also potentially increase the ownership of such policies and the sustainability of such policies. And finally, it is also impinging on the economic space by increasing the certainty for private sector investments, which are necessary, as I mentioned several times already. Much of the technology that we need is not yet in the Philippines, and yet we can import these technologies with foreign investors, partnering with our domestic investors in order for us to rapidly catch up in terms of the necessary technologies for a more successful drive for growth in the blue economy. So, marine spatial planning in the Philippines, as I put together this presentation several years back, it was Bataan and Batangas that were the key examples. There could be some more examples here. I haven't been able to update this, but certainly Bataan and Batangas are among the leaders and the provinces we can learn from in terms of marine spatial planning. Bataan currently in phase 6 in terms of implementation and adopted already the MSP in 2006. And Batangas MSP for Batangas Bay Area was developed in 99 and adopted also in 2006. So somewhat many years ago, and can actually potentially offer lessons already at this stage for many other provinces. And of course, the good governance in the blue economy should redound to a stronger, more fully developed blue economy that involves strong public-private partnerships. So that's key also in the blue economy, and is probably going to be a channel for increased investments, increased technology transfer for our country, and also increased benefits for the domestic stakeholders, the fisher folk, the coastal communities that can immediately benefit from some of those developments through job creation that is higher value adding, and also slightly better paid than the image that I showed you in the beginning of this presentation, which is still describing our underinvested, technology lacking blue economy at this stage in the country's development. But I must say that as a proponent and advocate of the development of the blue economy, that we hold a lot of potential as a country, and it's something that should certainly be figured into our development plans. So with that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you for listening to this presentation on the blue economy, and I look forward to discussing this topic further with you. Sir, are you on mute? Sir, nakamute po kayo.
Thank you, Doctor. We are in the question and answer portion, and the box has told me that you have answered 6 questions already. And my director here has said, can you please read the questions for documentation purposes? So with your permission, Doctor, I will read the question, and so you will, and I will read your answer. Please interrupt me if you would like to add anything while I read your answer, okay? Will that be all right?
Yes, sir. Or I can answer it again if you would like, this time live.
That would be better, Doctor. I will read the question and then you will answer.
Sige po.
The first question here is, who is the best development partner for your proposed shipbuilding industry? Will it be the private sector undertaking majority of research and development, investments, or another country?
Okay, my quick answer po dyan ay dapat talaga private sector yung ating partner dyan. They have the resources, they have the technology, and ideally we would have a foreign private sector partner as well as a domestic private sector partner to ensure that technologies is absorbed by our country. Often we let foreign investors in but don't necessarily do a good job in absorbing their technology, and so therefore we get stuck in low value added manufacturing, which is not necessarily the type of investments that we would like to pursue. So I do think there are many private sector partners we can think of, particularly for the shipbuilding industry, which is the specific question here. I just mentioned the few Ostal is actually one of the larger shipbuilding companies based in Australia. And the key here is that some of these companies are based in countries that are also our national security partners. That helps us because the extent to which we can play a key role in ship repair, not just shipbuilding, that could allow us to even grow that industry even more. So that's to our advantage and something that we can explore and pursue.
Another question was, reading from your working paper, WRI, reported again that the Philippine coral reefs are included in the most endangered in the world due to overfishing, pollution, and climate change. The numbers of endangered marine and coastal species are also rising, reaching up to 625 threatened fish species in 2010. Why do you think the propellant for this 174-hectare Dumaguete coastal reclamation proposal strongly think that this will be a good economic investment and move for our coastal city?
Thank you, po, for that question. I must admit very humbly, I know little of the reclamation project proposal. I know only that it's quite controversial, but I know little of the specifics of this reclamation project, so that I don't want to immediately dismiss it. I do think that most projects like it will include important trade-offs that need to be considered. So all I can emphasize is that those projects must be very well researched. Ideally, the holistic impact on the systems that I talked about, the marine ecosystems, and the economy should be examined very thoroughly. And the results shared with all the stakeholders so that they are transparent and accountable in the kind of investment decisions that government or the private sector may make. I do also think that there are advancements in economic valuation and economic analysis now that allow us to better capture the economic importance of those systems that I described earlier that were not necessarily factored into earlier investment decisions. Having said that, I don't think it is right to just stop all infrastructure projects and reclamation projects just because they have trade-offs. We may yet have to make some of those difficult decisions as long as they are part of a holistic development plan, and not sort of a piecemeal decision that does not consider many other development goals like food security. So I hope that's sort of an evidence-based answer to that tricky question.
Yes. Thank you, Doctor. Moving on, does developing ocean-based renewable energy affect the marine ecosystem? If yes, Dumaguete marine life is so rich and diverse. Would it be reasonable to say that ocean-based renewable energy would not be the best move for Dumaguete?
Oh, this is an excellent question. And again, I cannot claim to be a marine scientist. I do know that those types of energy systems are somehow supported by some of our marine scientists. So I have to believe that they already factored in some of the trade-offs that those systems may imply. They should also be juxtaposed against our national decision to keep away from other energy sources like coal-fired plants, for instance. So even if there are some possible trade-offs, even with marine energy systems, it is possible that the trade-offs are actually smaller compared to the other energy systems that we will now be moving away from. So I do think that's the right type of questioning to pursue, and hopefully the science and the evidence guide us in our decisions into these areas. I do also agree with the person who asked this question that different options must be analyzed. You know, if reclamation is one aspect that you want to talk about, maybe there are other uses for the area and ways of development that are also poverty reducing and technology enhancing and human welfare enhancing that could be considered with far less impact and risk on the marine ecosystems. So I think that's a good line of questioning to pursue.
Okay, next would be the official Facebook page of Dumaguete City has recently reported that there are fish from the coast of Dumaguete. However, it provides relatively small yield and not enough to supply the seafood needs of the city. In your working paper, it noted enhanced productivity in the fisheries sector could also provide a strong engine for growth and poverty reduction in the countryside. How can we help our Dumaguete LGU see this perspective and find ways to enhance productivity?
Thank you very much for that question. And I have every sympathy for your Dumaguete LGU. Most likely, like many other LGUs, their main goal is to find ways to reduce poverty, to keep increasing productivity and wages and incomes of people of Dumaguete. And so they're looking at these development trajectories. I do agree with the person who asked this question to basically examine other options, and to one option, for instance, that I briefly talked about is, even though you may not necessarily be a rich fishing area, you may actually be a rich spawning area for some of the, for some of this sea life that eventually becomes part of the food supply. That doesn't mean that you should give up on protecting those areas. In fact, if you did, then other areas food security will be impacted by your decision. So that's one possibility, and I think the scientists really need to look at the situation, look at the role of Dumaguete and its immediate environs in terms of our food security. I talked a little bit about the role of the Philippines in general, that if the Philippines does not do a good job protecting the spawning areas, it will not just be Philippine food security impacted. It will be Asian food security. On the other hand, I think as a Filipino, it's only fair to challenge our neighbors to a greater understanding of our role and our leadership in protecting our food supply for everybody. So if in case they want to help out and contribute to this protection, I think that's only a fair statement for an economist to challenge them. So that's also part of the learning and the sharp argumentation, evidence-based argumentation that we need to develop. Now, you put that in the specific situation of Dumaguete. Wala po kayong nahuhuling isda siguro na makakain nyo kagad kasi hindi pa sila yung malaking isda, no? So that doesn't mean that you should give up on your marine ecosystem. It could be that you're the spawning ground and the harvesting area is somewhere in Iloilo or Cebu or somewhere else. If you do a bad job, then they will be the ones to suffer from the economic consequence, right? So marine scientists really need to jump in and advance the research and our understanding of what possible implications on the decision making will be.
Thank you. One would like to ask your opinion. Do you think China's aggression towards our territorial waters is hindering us from effectively utilizing and protecting our marine resources? If so, has there been any real action taken protecting our local fishermen and resources, which, in my understanding, are vital assets in a blue economy?
Thank you very much for that question, si Mr. De La Peña. I think actually that's something that I wanted to spend some time explaining to our kababayans in Dumaguete. Ang tingin po kasi ng siguro ng mga banyaga sa atin, pag nakita nila tayo sa dagat, puro mahirap na mangingisdang Pilipino lang yung nakakaharap nila. And that is actually an artifact of our lack of understanding and our lack of investments in the blue economy. So yun na nga, nasasagasaan yung mga mangingisda natin sa laot. At wala silang teknolohiya, hindi maganda yung mga bangka nila, hindi sila safe. At because they are not really technologically equipped, they are also not very productive. Right? So yung picture kanina, isang mahirap na mangingisdang Pilipino na napakaliit ng sweldo niya, tapos yung product niya, konting-konting value added, ibebenta sa mga dayuhan. How many stories have you heard where a big tuna is purchased sa laot pa lang? Dinidikitan na ng mga foreign vessels. Ibibigyan sila ng motor o ng pagkain in exchange for prime fish that they can sell at a higher value in bigger markets. Siguro po naririnig nyo na rin po yan. In my research on the blue economy, I've heard so many stories of our fisher folk who are not able to extract the right and fair compensation for their efforts. And because of their lack of productivity, they are also very, very weak in terms of the overall economic system. So I do think that our future, our national security, depends on us strengthening our blue economy. We are the second most archipelagic country in the world, and yet our culture is not tied to the sea. Not every Filipino can even swim, no? And not every Filipino knows how to sail a boat. So, parang nawala na po sa kultura natin yung maritime culture na doon pinanggalingan ng mga Pilipino. Kaya nga po tayo nandito sa 7,600 islands natin. Napunta dito yung mga ninuno natin eh. So I think it's only fair to say that blue economy can play a bigger role in our development. And as long as it does not, then we remain vulnerable to countries like our giant friend across South China Sea that may not necessarily respect our borders that often. It will continue to do so as long as we do not have muscle in the blue economy. As long as ang nakikita nila, ang kaharap nila doon, mahirap na mangingisda. And until we invest heavily in the blue economy, until we as a people recognize the true value of this maritime sector in our national security, I think we will continue to be bullied, which is unfortunate for the next generation. That's something we should stop.
Good point, sir. Next would be, The presence of second, third-hand ships in RoRo and inter-island marine transportation is somewhat counterproductive to promoting the blue economy, as these diesel guzzling monsters are unsustainable and dangerous at best. However, to have a shipbuilding firm in the Philippines, foreign private sector or local private sector, would you think that the material production and emissions produced by the dry docks can be offset by the green-blue economic spillovers caused by the increased use of more sustainable ships produced in our country?
This is an excellent question, and I have to say, this is probably an expert already looking into this area who asked this question. So, or a private sector player who is familiar with the types of technology that even the ships that I showed you earlier in my presentation. These are being exported to countries that have significantly advanced their sustainability and respect for their blue economy and also their green economy. So I think the large catamaran was to be exported to Norway, and many other Scandinavian countries are actually part of our market for the ships that we are building in the Philippines. So I have to believe that many of these ships contain technologies that are already becoming more and more friendly to sustainability. And it's unfortunate that we don't absorb some of those technologies, even though we desperately need them. No, there's a large potential market here in the Philippines. So there is a proposal. You might be interested to hear about this if you don't know about it already. Similar po ito dun sa discussion ng jeepney na alam natin medyo smoke belching and not very efficient yung mga luma po nating mga jeep sa kalye. Pinapalitan po natin yan ng mga sasakyan na much more friendly to the environment or much more efficient yung mga makina. Ganun din po siguro yung kailangan nating upgrading in terms of our inter-island logistics and transport. And part of this upgrading should ideally link up to our capability building to improve design for our waters. So I think the person who asked this is familiar with all of these second-hand ships that we are importing and using for RoRo are very old ships and are not designed for our tropical typhoon waters. So pagka po binabagyo, it's not surprising na lumulubog po yung marami. So I think kung meron tayong mga designers, sa mga bata, engineers and scientists can upgrade our, as part of our effort to upgrade our shipbuilding industry, can also improve the safety of our inter-island logistics and transport. And that in itself can also contribute to our economic development and growth as a country. So those are the kinds of bold ambition and steps we can take that can unleash the blue economy and make it a big driver of inclusive economic growth in the country.
Thank you. For those viewers who missed the rules, we would like to request you to type your questions at the question and answer box. For those in Facebook, my co-hosts will be the ones to type their message here. Meanwhile, there is a question here at the chat. Mr. Belga, I have a question. Are the maritime laws in the Philippines doing good to our economy in terms of trade? He thinks Marina only registers local shipping line and not international. That is why we do not have our own international shipping line. What can you say, Dr.
Yes, thank you, Sir Benji. Actually, I must humbly admit that I have not been following the most recent developments in Marina. Marina, of course, is much better than not having marina at all.
I agree.
So marina is already a policy innovation to help us advance uh, our efforts and coordinate our efforts in the maritime sector. But you are right, we are not yet a player in nor a hub in shipping, but we can be, and it can actually contribute to our tourism. It can contribute to our service oriented economy, and be part of that shipbuilding and ship repair industry that we want to grow. And since a whole number of the big bulk of manpower in the maritime sector is actually Filipino, there must be something to be said about linking up to that sector and tapping it so that it can also further contribute to our domestic economy. But I must humbly admit that I have not yet gotten an update on Marina and what it has been doing in recent years. I do know that several marine scientists I have been working with, including Dr. Rod Asansa of UPMSI, we have been advancing the idea of a Department of Maritime Economy, or Department of Blue Economy, just as what the Indonesians have, so that you actually have a solid game plan to strengthen this sector, which I think is very, very promising as a source of growth, particularly for this decade. Naghahanap na po tayo ng additional engines of growth for the country para hindi tayo ma-trap sa middle income country trap. If you're familiar with this discussion of the economists, minsan po kasi pag yumayaman yung bansa and you reach a certain level of development, you start to grow slower because your main engines have already been exhausted. And our main engines are actually in Luzon, in Calabarzon. Habang tumataas po ang mga wages dyan, nagiging less competitive po yung sector na yan, not unless tataas ng tataas yung productivity through innovation and technology. Pero habang nangyayari po yan, kailangan rin po maghanap tayo ng ibang engines of growth para tuloy-tuloy yung pagyaman po natin bilang isang bansa. And I would argue the blue economy is actually a largely untapped, largely underinvested sector in our country.
Thank you, Doctor. Here's one more question. Do you think that reclamation projects in the Philippines are part of China's Belt and Road Initiative? Do you think China's Belt and Road Initiative is helpful or harmful in developing the Philippine blue economy?
That's a very tricky question to answer, and I would like to. I have my own suspicions of Chinese foreign policy in some instances because of the way they are acting in the West Philippine Sea. But I would like to be fair to them. I would like to consider the Belt and Road Initiative in its design as something that can actually help us grow as a country, but also as a region, because we're interconnecting with China and other countries in the region. So it's ASEAN and China, right? So the idea behind Belt and Road Initiative is actually a good one. It's supposed to interconnect countries that want to trade, invest, and send tourists to each other, and send technology, across each other's territories, and data across each other's territories, in order to mutually tap development opportunities. Unfortunately, in the governance of some Belt and Road Initiative projects, there is a lot to be expected, a lot to be said about greater transparency and a more holistic assessment of their sustainability implications. So as long as we have good governance and we are able to push back if they are not doing the right thing, I think we should be able to extract a good economic relationship with China and other trading and investment partners, as long as we maintain our strong good governance. If we are not able to do this, then I think the track record of China is such that they will pursue their own interests, and this won't necessarily be good for the development of the country that is suffering from bad governance. So there are case studies that show that countries with good governance working with China tend to produce better results. Countries with bad governance, not necessarily transparent, and not necessarily pursuing this sustainability goal, partnering with Chinese partners, don't necessarily produce good outcomes. So the challenge is not on China, it is on us. We must maintain our good governance. We must maintain the types of checks and balances that will make sure we don't make big mistakes in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative. And having said that, that is not to say that we will not pursue reclamation projects and put an end to all those projects. I think there is still a role for that, but we have to have a holistic development perspective on all of those projects, not just a piecemeal development of what can make a lot of money or immediately cash in on opportunities in some areas. Because there are big trade-offs in some of those big projects. And the people who will pay for those trade-offs, the people who will suffer from those trade-offs, are the ones who are not necessarily going to benefit from the project. Sila na nga yung nakalimutang konsultahin, sila pa yung masasaktan ng proyekto. So that is the thing that we must avoid. That we pursue those projects because they will put a lot of money in the pockets of some investors and some domestic partners, while not necessarily doing well for our inclusive development as a country.
Thank you. I think you have answered this question about maritime laws in the Philippines. Are they doing good in terms of, yes, you have answered that. Here, how can the national government help in fixing the bad governance that has harmed the maritime industry? Does bad governance contribute negatively to the foreign investors that are entering the local maritime industry?
That's an interesting question. How can the national government contribute to fixing the bad governance in the maritime industry and presumably in the local governments? Is that the question? I think actually it's the reverse. The local communities, groups like yours, are doing a lot to correct the bad governance of your local area and the national area by demonstrating what we as a people should really be pursuing. So activities like what you are organizing tonight is to me an act of good governance by actually inviting experts, better informing yourselves, and pushing for greater transparency to understand the implications, the development implications of very big projects that may not have been holistically assessed, right? So baliktad po, ang tingin ko, do not expect the national government to step in and fix your problem. You are doing the right thing by actually signaling to the rest of the country that you're not just going to take a reclamation project on its face value. You want a better assessment of its implications. You want your local officials to explain properly what you will improve and what you will potentially affect, meaning the trade-offs. And by actually elevating this issue to the national level, you are showing to the rest of us how to do it properly. So hindi po kami magko-correct ninyo. Kayo po ang nagpapakita sa buong bansa kung paano po gawin to ng tama. So my hats off to the people of Dumaguete for showing a lot of backbone by actually pushing this discussion to the national level, because ngayon nga po, nababasa na namin itong controversy on this reclamation project, even here in Marikina.
Okay. Here's one, Doctor. How can we increase awareness on the blue economy as one valuable aspect in pursuing the economic progress for our city?
Yes, and I believe actually that places like Dumaguete City have a big leadership role to play, because you are intensely proud of the sustainability of your domestic environment. and you don't want it damaged, and yet you feel the pressure, which is fair enough. So I feel for your local government. You feel the pressure of the need for job creation, the need to attract investments, the need to continue to develop your local economy. So I think that's really the tension that we must face. You're going to look at opportunities. Some of those opportunities have big trade-offs in terms of sustainability, and you will be guided presumably by the science and evidence of what trade-offs will be attached to which options. So yung isa pong nagtatanong kanina, if I understand correctly the line of questioning, parang sinasabi niya, what if hindi na lang reclamation? What if energy generation na lang? What if food generation na lang yung i-pursue? That could very well be a potential option. And I think if you choose that, especially if you do it in a way that preserves food security, not just for Dumaguete, but for a big chunk of the country where presumably an ecosystem will not be tampered with. Kung ganyan po yung role ng Dumaguete, maganda na malagyan ng resources, hindi lang ng Dumaguete, kundi ng buong bansa. And that could be the role that you play. But you will not be able to play this role if you are not able to convince the rest of us Filipinos that Dumaguete is the spawning ground for 50% of a species that is actually part of our food security, 30% of this, which is part of what keeps our food supply healthy. All of those things need to be established by good science and good evidence. And I think that's really part of the discussion that we need to advance. Let me tell you this, from an economist perspective, if Dumaguete tries to optimize its own economic development without caring about the rest of the country, it will probably, and if everyone does that, not just Dumaguete City, baka si Cebu, si Iloilo, si Aurora, yung mga iba, nagganon-ganon na lang, that will be the end of us, no? An uncoordinated effort that does not look at the systems-based interdependency of our food supply, of our sustainable use of these resources, it would not be good for our sustainable development. So I think that's where the discussion with the national government is very, very important. If Dumaguete decides to go on its own, most likely its decision will be suboptimal. Kasi kailangan, kung katulad po nun, kung totoo po yung observation na spawning ground yung area po ninyo, the main benefit is actually not going to Dumaguete. It's probably going somewhere else, right? So you should be compensated for it if you're protecting that area. Why should people in Dumaguete go hungry while it is being harvested in other places? So medyo tama rin po yung tension na parang naghahanap kayo ng way na kumita dun sa resources ninyo. But at the same time, kailangan po natin ng science para parehas po yung appreciation natin bilang isang bansa. So I am not a marine scientist, but I do appreciate some of the observations that I'm seeing in the discussions. And that could really be worked out by more evidence, more science actually bringing us together towards the best options, not just for Dumaguete, but for the entire country.
There are more, Doctor. Doctor, do you think our existing laws are adequate to promote the blue economy? Or is there a need to enact new laws to advance the blue economy as a major economic driver for the Philippines?
That's an interesting question. It goes against my deep inclinations right now, but I must say we probably need a few laws in this area. I am one of those economists who believe that we have over-legislated our development agenda. We like to create laws, but we are very poor in implementing these laws. So I think actually the giant part of the task is actually in the changing of our understanding of this sector and improving the awareness of our young people. So I'm really happy that so many young people were signing in earlier and hopefully listening to this, because The decisions we make today will uh, impact on their food security in the future and their development prospects. So I think that's the kind of greater awareness we need to work on. Um, the second part of it is we probably do need some legislative reforms, including a possible law to create that Department of Blue Economy or Department of Maritime sector for better coordination. But the coordination itself and basically the good governance that needs to take place, it cannot just be dependent on laws. It really needs to depend on institutions on the ground, such as yours, your business group. It's probably part of this institution. Really good, strong academic institutions like Silliman University that I know is based in Dumaguete. I hope one day I get to visit that university. I've never been there. I think these are the types of institutions that we can count on because they are trustworthy and they advance science and evidence. And that's the kind of thing that must guide us in this sector moving forward. I must say that there's a big development and governance challenge facing us when some groups, some people can make a lot of money on decisions that destroy the environment but line their pockets. Now, that is very unfortunate. And hopefully, we have enough institutions, enough young people, enough former youth like ourselves willing to stand up against those types of opportunistic, uh, you know, um, moves by some of these groups, which is quite unfortunate because it is the reverse of what the lesson we should be taking from this pandemic. This pandemic should teach us that we should take care of our environment. Otherwise, we are headed for more and more disasters to come. So I hope actually that even as we are facing difficult times, we do want to make money. We do want to create jobs. We do want to drive growth in places like Dumaguete City. I'm sure you are hurting right now because of the pandemic also. But we cannot do it in ways that destroy our future because that is even worse than what we are facing now. So that's I think a possible message I want to leave with all of you. Plus my hats off to all of you for making this a national issue. So pati po kami dito, nakikinig po kami sa mga decision making ninyo at sa mga issues emerging from this infrastructure or this reclamation project.
I think we still have more time. They're coming in, sir. Sir, they're asking, what is your perspective on the current 2018 National Security Strategy of the Philippines? Do you think it is in sync or how national security policy was crafted in 2017 in furthering the blue economy as part of 22 strategic industries stratagem before RP and ASEAN context?
Thank you very much for that question. That probably comes from a national security practitioner or expert. I am on record having participated in and supported the crafting of our national security strategy. I had the pleasure of actually presenting comments on it in Camp Aguinaldo just a few years before the pandemic. I do think that we should not stop there. We should continue to try to advance the strengthening of our national security strategy and our national security institutions because a strategy is useful, but without the strength of the institutions and the people who will implement it, it is just a piece of paper. So our commitment in Ateneo School of Government is to help in the advancement of the softer investments kasi nakafocus po tayo sa pag-purchase ng mga frigate, missiles at attack helicopters at saka mga baril. Pero yung tao po nagagamit po niyan ay mas mahalaga dun sa frigate, missiles at mga baril na bibili natin. So doon po kami naniniwala at doon po kami nag-i-invest sa Ateneo School of Government We now have a number of scholarships offered to the Philippine National Police and to the Armed Forces of the Philippines to try and get their best and brightest, to try and hone their skills as public sector managers and leaders. Because we are giving into their hands a tremendous amount of power with all of this modernization. And what should actually accompany this modernization is a modernization of our thinking as a people and our commitment to our democracy, even as we are strengthening our firepower in the national security sector. So yan po yung commitment ng Ateneo School of Government sa national security, and our commitment to the continued improvement of our national security strategy. That's my first response. My second response po is thanks to opportunities like this. So thank you to Sir Benji at si Ma'am Yani and Angeline for the opportunity to try and advance the advocacy on the blue economy. Kasi we should as a people better understand what our options are for our maritime sector. It is actually quite painful to watch us always be bullied in the West Philippine Sea, when in fact, we should be flexing our muscles, both political, economic, and cultural in this area. And maybe even scientific. Kasi ang dami naman po nating mga scientists who can also advance the learning, knowledge, and technology in this area. So I do hope that groups like yours will infect many other groups, especially in the business community, to invest in our blue economy. Kasi kulang po yung investments dyan. Kaya nga po yung picture kung unang-unang pinakita sa inyo, mahirap na mangingisdang Pilipino. Siya po ang nakakaharap ng mga dayuhan. When in fact, we have more than enough capability to invest and strengthen this sector. And as long as we do not do that, we as a people may not necessarily put so much value in it. Kasi nga po, napakaliit nung stake natin eh. At yung mga may stake dun sa sector, sila pa yung pinakamahirap sa ating lipunan. So paano nila ialalaban itong rights natin at itong sovereignty natin dyan sa area na yan? So I do think that that's a key to our national security, is cultural change, also an appreciation that this is important to us. That if our sovereignty is not respected in this area, we will not tolerate it. And we have the means to actually impose our rights and our sovereignty in these areas. So I hope that's what the young people also grow up believing in and also supporting in terms of a stronger blue economy in the future.
Thank you, Doctor. Maybe you will also have a follow-through with this question. What are your thoughts on the current administration's efforts on making these promising developments possible, considering that they have denounced our sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea?
I'd rather not comment on the administration's track record in this area. I think it speaks for itself. I do want to reinforce what you and your group are doing tonight. No, it's this discussion, trying to find out what the options are, trying to make things more transparent, and maybe even placing yourselves in the shoes of your officials, local officials, in fairness to them, and in fairness to the other investors looking at this area. Maybe it is a lack of transparency on other options. Maybe it is also a lack of political will trying to push for alternatives. But certainly, what you're trying to push tonight and what you're trying to advance in terms of greater awareness, organized understanding of what options you may have, these are very, very important and should be actually replicated in many other places in the country that are not doing as well as Dumaguete City in protecting their blue economy. Marami pong mga areas na hindi po talaga maganda yung governance at hindi rin po well organized po ang mga communities at mga stakeholders. At kung ganyan po ang mangyayari, marami pong mabibiktima na hindi naman po sila nakonsulta dun sa mga proyekto na tinutulak na medyo short-term yung gains, medyo malakas yung contribution sa GDP growth, pero very negative naman yung implications on sustainability and fairness for our people. So that's actually not a good thing. So I'm really deeply encouraged by your efforts, and I hope many other groups and communities take this on and also pursue the same track.
Do we still have time? Because there are a lot. Doctor, the blue economy highlights the banner of maritime sustainability among many other goals. Now, the East Asian Energy Forum this year outlined Asian transitional energy initiatives specifically through carbon capture technology and hydrogen ammonia fuel engines in the coming years. As such, where do these fast approaching Asian initiatives coincide with the blue economy?
There is a very, very big connection with the blue economy. In fact, if you had access to our paper, which I shared with sila Yani and Angeline, it included a calculation that showed the carbon capture contribution of the mangrove forests and different parts of our coastal areas. That actually, based on the science, so again, I'm not a marine scientist, but I am literate enough to understand their scientific findings, that it has carbon capture implications. So if you do damage to this, then we are not advancing our climate stability objectives, right? So it is linked. I do think that beyond carbon capture, there's also the protection of coastal regions. We do expect from climate change that there will be sea level rise and also greater volatility in climate and the types of climate-borne disasters that we face as a country. So that's also part of what our investments in the blue economy should be linking up to, such as replanting mangrove forests, making sure the existing ones are protected, and making the right investments so that all of it tends to be contributing to those goals. So I think the Asian level efforts are a good sign that there is growing recognition. In fact, I just saw the other day that ADB floated a bond so that it could finance better blue economy investments. So this is certainly a good sign and something that maybe even you in Dumaguete would be interested to look into, because they may help finance investments at the local level to also advance the blue economy. And because of those types of investments, it could redound to a stronger progress and advancement of the blue economy in the different parts of the country.
Thank you, Doctor. Can we ask for 2 more questions na lang po?
That's
Alright.
okay po. Kayo lang, baka po some of the kids miss dinner. I'm okay, already had dinner.
There is this question. How can a sustainable blue economy contribute to a green recovery?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think tongue in cheek, there's no conflict between blue and green as far as the blue economy. Pareho po silang mahalaga. Napansin lang po nung iba na there was an emphasis on green economy, but for a country like the Philippines, where a lot of our territory is actually water, parang we are not investing as much into the blue economy as we are in, I guess, enhancing awareness in the green economy. So I think the blue needs to catch up a little bit and sort of match the ambition and investments, in the terrestrial area. I think those are linked. Just to give an example, for instance, yung energy, if we can tap energy sources from the blue economy, we may not necessarily need to be too dependent on dirty industries to generate our energy. So if we shift away from coal, for instance, coal-fired plants, maybe part of the response could be wind, maybe part of the response could be solar, but maybe a growing part of the response could be, the ocean-based energy sources. So my understanding po, and again, I'm not a scientist, a hard scientist involved in those energy sources, but my understanding is as long as we have water and the moon, there will be waves, and the waves will continue to generate energy for the types of technology and machines that we are able to deploy to tap those waves, which then are able to continuously generate energy for coastal areas. I think the future hopefully will give us options in terms of, uh, putting them in batteries and making them dependable power sources, which could be very, very important. And also potentially commercializing some of the energy sources. But I think even though it's not yet commercial at this point, that's my understanding, it's still important to develop the capability to develop and better understand these types of energy resources, because that's how you eventually get to the commercialization phase eventually. So I do think they are interlinked. If you had options on the terrestrial, on land, and you are exhausting those options, maybe you're not looking enough in the ocean-based options, which could actually improve your menu of options for sustainable recovery.
Thank you. Here's one very persistent one. It goes back to our controversy. Finally, put you on the spot. Do you think that this smart city, that's the proposed project, can improve the job problems of the city? Will this smart city create jobs? We think, however, that it will still be a job mismatch. Business are still hiring here, but it is hard to look for employees who fit the job description.
So I want to be fair to the proponents of this reclamation project, this investment, because I think that's the beginning of an evidence-based discussion. We should not be biased. You look at the evidence in favor and against a project, and then you put that to the decision makers, and you make a decision as a community, right? Or you hold your decision makers accountable. So in terms of job generation, uh, and this is why I asked, is there a holistic development plan underpinning this project? Unfortunately, my experience is the projects, sometimes driven by the Belt and Road Initiative, but sometimes driven by other sources of finance, are very big on financial return, right? Because they will make a lot of money. Reclamation projects, as you know, is medyo tubong lugaw po yan dahil from 0 pesos per square meter, biglang, tens of thousands of pesos per square meter. So talagang gagawa ka ng maraming pera, right? Then, potentially there's nothing wrong with this. We do need to drive our economic growth. We do need to give our investors a chance to advance their companies and advance their investments. But at the same time, if you do not underpin this in a holistic development plan, it's very difficult to imagine that you have, for instance, made the correct trade-offs and recognized them and made sure that they don't create too much damage to the domestic sustainability goals that we've been talking about, number one. Number two, your question, which is, will it actually create jobs, or will it just attract non-Dumaguete people into Dumaguete? Kasi po, nandyan pala yung smart city, tapos yung smart city, everyone, including Dean Ron, suddenly wants to live in Dumaguete because pagod na po siya sa Marikina dahil binabaha po kami dito minsan. Baka mas maganda po dyan sa Dumaguete. Who knows, no? What the plan is. But that's why I keep on asking, meron po bang plano that underpins that reclamation project, that particular project? If there is, it should answer many of the questions that you're raising. And if it still doesn't, then it is clearly an incomplete plan. It must have a strategy on how it's going to deliver on those promises of job creation that you mentioned. My experience is that when some of these island cities develop these large infrastructure projects like Metro Cebu, for instance, or Metro Iloilo, nag-attract po siya ng mga migrants into this area. And it can actually attract the best and brightest of other places. And that could also be good for Dumaguete. If that's your plan, other places in the country, other countries actually have done that. Singapore has done that. And they have tried to develop on the back of the brain power and talent and innovative capability of different people coming into that small place. If that's your game plan, then maybe that could be the way that this particular project answers that aspiration. On the other hand, if your concern is that there is no detailed plan on how that will happen, and yet the sustainability questions are also not clarified, the costs, the trade-offs are not fairly assessed or transparently assessed, then that certainly will create more I guess, doubt and mistrust rather than belief that this is a good plan. So you know, that's sort of a clear point that I think we can take away from projects like that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ronald Mendoza. Or as we say here, daghang salamat, sir.
Daghang salamat din po, Sir Benji and everyone. I don't want to get between you and your dinner if some of you are still having dinner, but I'm happy to still field questions and stay with you, and I appreciate the chance to catch up.
Well, on behalf of the Dumaguete City Host Lions Club and the Rotary Club of Dumaguete South, we thank everybody for joining us. And we look forward to our resource person being able to visit Dumaguete City. The next learning activity will be on Thursday. It will be on coastal integrity and climate change. The speaker will be Dr. Fernando P. Seringan, Professor, UP Marine Science Institute, and NAST academician. So, the speaker we would like to ask final words from Dr. Mendoza.
Just very briefly, I want to thank all of you for the chance to catch up tonight. It's been an honor to join this discussion. I am also learning from the issue and obviously also learning from other scientists working in this area. As an economist, I am also aware of the very difficult trade-offs and decisions we must sometimes be faced with. We all want to create jobs. We all want to create investments that advance our GDP growth. But at the same time, it's only right that we care about sustainability and that we care about protecting those resources that we pass on to the next generation. And I believe the heart of our discussion is good governance, because that is the only way we're going to navigate these difficult decisions fairly and with enough evidence to guide us. So thank you, everyone. I hope we can stay in touch, and I hope one day soon I will be blessed to visit your very, very beautiful city I heard of. I've not seen it. And see you then until that day.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you po. Ingat po.
Thank you again, and see you again on the next learning activity.